The courtroom is supposed to be the one place where chaos doesn't win, where anger, grief, and vengeance are kept at bay by the walls of justice. But sometimes those walls crack. And when they do, what bursts through isn't reason, it's rage. On this day, in a crowded courtroom filled with tears and tension, justice had already been served. The verdict was in. The sentence was about to be read. But what no one expected was that a grieving family would decide to serve their own justice. This is a story of what happens when families attack convicts in courtrooms, when pain boils over and grief explodes into violence. And once you hear what happened in this case, you'll understand why order collapsed in an instant. It began months earlier with a crime that sent shockwaves through the community. The defendant was a young man, just 27 years old, but his actions were anything but youthful recklessness. They were deliberate, violent, and devastating. Late one night, he entered a family home. Inside, a father, a mother, and their teenage daughter. What should have been a safe space, a home filled with warmth, turned into a scene of horror. By the time neighbors heard the screams and called 911, it was too late. The father was dead, the mother critically injured, and the daughter traumatized in ways words could barely describe. The town demanded justice. And when the trial began, the family members of the victims filled the courtroom every single day. They sat quietly, clutching tissues, listening as evidence was laid out in painful detail. Photos, witness testimony, the sound of the mother's broken voice as she recounted the night her life was destroyed. The defendant, though, showed almost nothing. No remorse, no regret, just a blank, detached stare. Some even said they caught a smirk on his face as evidence was shown. That smirk would become a spark. For weeks, the trial dragged on. The prosecution laid out the brutality of the crime. The defense tried, argued diminished capacity, desperation, anything to lessen the weight of guilt. But the jury didn't buy it. After deliberating, they returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The family wept. The defendant sat stone-faced, and the judge announced that sentencing would take place the following month. In that gap, between the guilty verdict and the sentencing, something festered. The family couldn't escape the nightmares, couldn't escape the images of what had been done, and they couldn't escape the sight of the man who had caused it all, sitting just feet away from them, protected by deputies, but alive and breathing while their loved one was gone forever. By the time sentencing day came, emotions weren't just running high. They were boiling over. The courtroom was packed that morning. Reporters lined the back rows. Victims' families filled the gallery. Deputies stood ready, sensing the tension in the air. The judge entered, robed and solemn, and began to read the sentence. His words were measured, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of the law. He spoke of the crime, of the devastation it caused, of the permanent loss the family would carry for the rest of their lives. And then he delivered the sentence. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. For many families, that might have been enough. Justice, as much as the system could provide, had been delivered, but not here. Because at that exact moment, as the words "life without parole" echoed to the courtroom, the defendant leaned back in his chair and smirked. That smirk was a match to a room already filled with gasoline. The first cry came from the victim's sister, a piercing, guttural sound that cut through the judge's final words. She screamed, "You monster!" And before anyone would stop her, she charged forward. The deputies moved fast, but not fast enough. The defendant barely had time to register what was happening before she swung her fists, striking him across the face. The courtroom erupted. A brother leapt over the wooden barrier, tackling the convict from the side. The defense attorney stumbled backward as the chaos exploded around him. The mother of the victim, frail but furious, swung her handbag with all the strength grief could muster, striking the man who had taken her husband's life. Deputies rushed in, grabbing arms, pulling bodies apart, shouting order, order in the court. But order was long gone. For 30 seconds, the courtroom wasn't a place of justice. It was a storm of raw human rage. The convict, once smug and expressionless, was now on the floor, his lips split, his face red with the impact of fists and fury. It took 6 deputies to restrain the family. One by one, they were dragged out, still screaming, still reaching, still crying out for the man who had destroyed their lives. The gallery was left frozen in shock. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked, and the judge's gavel pounded over and over, but it was drowned out by the chaos. When the dust settled, the family members were escorted out, some in handcuffs, others in tears. The defendant was dragged away, too, his smug expression wiped clean, his arrogance replaced with the reality of a bloodied face and a shaken body. The judge recessed the hearing, his voice heavy with anger, but also with something else, understanding. Because while the law cannot allow violence in its halls, everyone knew what had fueled it. For the family, it wasn't about justice anymore. It was about pain. It was about rage that no sentence, no prison term, no number of years could ever erase. And for everyone who witnessed it, that day served as a reminder. The courtroom may be built on order, but when grief collides with injustice, order doesn't always win. In the end, the family members who attacked the convict faced their own charges. Disorderly conduct, assault. But in the eyes of many, they weren't criminals. They were parents, siblings, loved ones, pushed past the breaking point. The convict went to prison, sentenced for life. But the image that stayed with everyone wasn't just the sentence being read. It was the moment the family lunged forward. The moment grief broke through the walls of justice. And it leaves us with one haunting question. When the system delivers its cold version of justice, is it ever enough for those left behind? This was families attacking convicts in courtrooms.